October 1st, 2009, Ed Sullivan Theater, West 53rd Street, Manhattan. David Letterman walked to his mark the way he always did, measured, deliberate, already scanning the room. 27 years of late night had earned him that ovation. He sat down, adjusted the cards in front of him, and began to speak. What he said should have stopped the room cold. He told them about the threat, the package left in his car, the $2 million someone believed his secrets were worth. He said the words terrible, terrible things, and the audience laughed, because this was David Letterman, and David Letterman was always performing, always at exactly one remove from whatever he was actually saying. They were wrong that night, but he had spent so long perfecting the art of not seeming to perform that no one could tell the difference anymore. Now go back 20 years, a different desk, a different room, Studio One, NBC Burbank. Letterman sitting across from Johnny Carson, the man he had structured his entire career around impressing. The cameras found him quick, easy, untouchable. That was the version the audience got. What they didn't see was a man who had watched his father die of his second heart attack at 57 and had filed that fact somewhere dark and unexamined. A man building an empire out of wit and out of things he had never said out loud to anyone. Have you ever been so skilled at hiding what was wrong that when it finally surfaced, no one believed it was real? Leave a comment below, because that question is the architecture of David Letterman's life. Indianapolis, Indiana in 1947 was not a city that drew attention to itself. It sat in the dead center of the country and did what middle American cities did. It manufactured things, raised families, went to church on Sundays, and produced men and women who understood the distance between what they wanted and what was reasonable to expect. The North Side, where the Lettermans lived, was the respectable part of town. Not wealthy, not struggling. The kind of neighborhood where a florist could build a decent life if he kept his books in order and showed up every morning. Harry Letterman was that florist. He ran his shop, came home, and somewhere between the two, he became a different man, the version of himself that could make a room laugh. He had a gift for it. His son noticed early. David Letterman would say decades later, in a 2000 Esquire interview, that he had always admired his father's ability to tell jokes and be the life of the party. That detail is worth sitting with. Not the florist part, not the Indianapolis part, the party part. The ability to transform a room, to take the weight of an ordinary Tuesday and convert it, briefly, into something that made other people feel lighter than they had a minute before. David was the middle child, born April 12, 1947, with one older sister and one younger. His mother, Dorothy, worked as a secretary at the Second Presbyterian Church of Indianapolis. The household ran on two modest incomes and the kind of quiet Midwestern discipline that didn't encourage self-examination or dramatic ambition. Letterman was not a remarkable student. He would eventually endow a scholarship at Ball State University, specifically for what he called C students, which was, he made clear, autobiographical. He wanted to be in radio. He didn't know yet what that meant exactly. He just knew he wanted to be the voice coming out of the box. But there was something else in the house, something that ran beneath the normalcy like a fault line. When David was still a boy, his father had a heart attack. Harry Letterman was 36 years old. He survived. He went back to the shop, back to the dinner table, back to telling jokes at parties while people who loved him laughed and had no idea what had already happened inside his chest. David watched. He filed it away. The knowledge that the man who could make any room better was walking around with something quietly wrong at the center of him. That knowledge does not leave a child intact. What was the moment, the person, the thing that first made you realize the world was more fragile than it had seemed? Drop it in the comments. Harry Letterman died in February 1973, a second heart attack. He was 57 years old. David was 25. He had already left Indiana by then, Ball State University in Muncie. Graduated 1969, a degree in radio and television from a school he had chosen partly because Indiana University wouldn't take him. He worked the student station. He learned the rhythms of broadcast, how to pace, how to pause, how to make silence do something useful. In 1971, he was a pit road reporter for ABC Sports at the Indianapolis 500, standing in the noise and heat trying to say something coherent while engines tore past him. It was, by most measures, a minor credit, but it taught him something about performing under pressure that no classroom had. 2 years later, his father was gone, and David Letterman drove west, Los Angeles in 1975 was the place comedians went when they were serious. David Letterman arrived with the specific ambition of a man from Indiana who has spent years in the middle of the country watching the world happen somewhere else. He found the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard and began the work sets at midnight, sets at 2 in the morning, sets in front of rooms that weren't always listening. He was not the warmest performer on that stage. He was dry, precise, ironic in ways that took a moment to land. But when they landed, they stayed. He was not alone in that room. Jay Leno was working the same clubs at the same hours, and for a stretch in the mid-1970s, the two of them were genuinely close, trading bits, reading each other's material, the kind of friendship that forms between people who are both hungry and both honest about it. Letterman would later describe Leno in 1986 as a master at getting the audience on his side. That is the language of admiration, not rivalry. The rivalry came later. It was manufactured, partly by circumstances neither man fully controlled, and it would eventually cost both of them more than either expected. But in 1975, they were just two comedians from the Midwest trying to figure out whether the rooms on Sunset Boulevard were ever going to take them seriously. Claude Ram. Johnny Carson noticed in 1978 that sentence does not fully communicate what it meant. In 1978, Johnny Carson was not merely the host of The Tonight Show, he was the adjudicator of American comedy. To appear on his program was to receive a verdict. To be invited back was to be approved. Carson had Letterman on, watched what he did, and invited him back. He would eventually have him on as a substitute host. In the world late night had created, this was as close to a laying on of hands as the industry offered. By 1980, NBC gave Letterman his own show, a daytime program that lasted 4 months before the network pulled it. The failure mattered less than the lesson. Daytime audiences wanted something different, and Letterman was not built for something different. He was built for the late-night hour, for the audience awake past midnight, for the viewer who wanted their entertainment to have an edge they could feel. Late Night with David Letterman launched on NBC in February 1982, occupying the 12:30 slot directly after Carson's Tonight Show. The timing was deliberate. The message was clear. Here was the air, already positioned, already in the building. The show ran for 11 years. It won in the ratings for its time slot, won awards, won the loyalty of an audience that recognized something authentic in its controlled strangeness, the stupid pet tricks. The viewer polls dropped without warning. The top 10 list that began as surreal jokes and became a cultural institution. The show was anarchic in ways that had never been permitted in that time slot before, and Letterman kept it disciplined enough that the anarchy felt intentional rather than accidental. What the show also required was total commitment. 5 nights a week, 40 weeks a year for 11 years. The pace was not sustainable by accident. It required a kind of self-erasure, a willingness to subordinate everything private to the demands of the machine. Letterman's first marriage, to college girlfriend Michelle Cook, had ended in 1977. By the 1980s, he was defined entirely by the show, by the craft, by the industry of producing one more hour of television before the week ended and the next week began. The ironic persona that made him famous was also functionally a closed door. Nothing came in that he did not choose to let in. It was a useful arrangement, but the body keeps its own ledger. Letterman had high cholesterol. He had a family history he understood with the precision of a man who had sat at his father's funeral at 25 and done the arithmetic. He was monitored. He knew what monitoring meant, and he kept working. Have realized TAVE something you worked years for and found it felt different than you imagined? Tell us below. By the late 1980s, Carson was aging visibly. The succession question, which had been theoretical for a decade, was becoming real. The NBC executives were beginning quietly to have conversations they had not yet had publicly. Helen Kushnick, Jay Leno's manager, was already working the phones, already building the case, already doing the work that Letterman, who believed the outcome was obvious, never thought to do. Letterman assumed he knew the answer. Carson, by every available signal, seemed to agree. But assumptions, as Letterman was about to learn, have a way of costing you exactly as much as the thing you assumed. The year is 1989. Late Night with David Letterman has been on the air for 7 years, and by any measurable standard, it is working. The ratings are solid. The critical regard is genuine. The audience that found the show in its first months has stayed, and stayed loyal in the way audiences stay loyal to something they feel belongs to them. Johnny Carson is 63 years old and is beginning, privately, to think about what comes next. The lives are real, the conversation is imagined. What is not imagined is this: Carson and Letterman have been in the same building for 7 years. They have appeared together. Carson has had Letterman on as a guest host. The industry understood, without anyone having to say it plainly, that there was a line of succession being drawn. Letterman understood it too. He had structured the entire decade of his professional life around it, not aggressively, not graspingly, but with the patient certainty of a man who has been told, in 100 indirect ways, that his time is coming. Carson was also, by every account that exists, deeply private. He had been married 3 times. He had a complicated relationship with his children. He performed warmth on camera with a precision that was itself a form of concealment. Off camera, he retreated. He was known to stand alone at the edge of parties. He deflected personal questions with jokes the way other men deflect them with silence. He had built a persona out of control. The measured host, the interviewer who gave nothing away, the man who could make 30 million people feel included without revealing a single true thing about himself. What he had built, in other words, was exactly what Letterman had modeled himself after. The student had learned the lesson so well that by 1989 the teacher and the student were operating with identical equipment. 2 men who didn't speak about real things, in a room together, talking about television. Imagine them on a Tuesday evening, somewhere in the NBC complex in Burbank, the green room, or a corridor, or the edge of a parking structure where Carson sometimes stood when he wanted air. What matters is the texture of it. 2 men from the Midwest, both funny, both constitutionally averse to the direct declaration, both fluent in the language of deflection that the comedy industry rewards and the interior life eventually bills you for. Neither one says what the room needs him to say. Carson does not say, "You are my choice." He does not say it because he believes it is obvious, or because he is constitutionally incapable of the direct declaration, or because he trusts the institution will do what it should. Letterman does not ask. He doesn't ask because asking would break the spell, because to name the thing is to make it possible for it to be denied, and denial is a weight he is not prepared to carry. So they talk about other things, about the business, about a bit that didn't land the way either of them expected, about something Carson saw that week that made him laugh. Letterman is good in this register. He is always good in this register. The quick observation, the deadpan pivot, the laugh that arrives before you've finished processing the joke. This is the version of himself he has practiced to precision, the one that fills the space where the other conversation would have been. What neither man says, and what both men know, is that Carson is looking at his successor, and what Letterman cannot say, what he has never been able to say to anyone in a professional register, is that he needs this. Not the desk, not the time slot, the acknowledgement, the direct, spoken, irrevocable confirmation from the one person whose opinion has organized his entire adult life. A florist's son from Indianapolis who learned to make rooms laugh by watching his father do it, now standing at the edge of the largest room in American television, waiting for the one word that never comes, to Howie. Have you ever been in a room where the most important thing went unsaid? Because that is exactly what this night was. Carson will retire in 1992. He will tell people privately, in the years that follow, that Letterman was his choice. He will cut off contact with Jay Leno entirely and never set foot on The Tonight Show set again. He will make his last live television appearance on Letterman's Late Show in 1994, sitting across the desk, and Letterman will look at him the way you look at someone you love and have never quite been able to reach. None of that is yet known. Standing here in 1989, in the corridor, 2 men from the Midwest who could have said the thing and didn't. What almost surfaced in every room they shared for 7 years was simple. I built this for you, and I need you to know it. The simpler version, I need you sad. Neither man could afford to say it, and so neither did sad. In May 1991, Johnny Carson announced his retirement. David Letterman did not receive a call from NBC. He did not receive a call from Carson. He waited, by his own account, with the patience of a man who has been told his entire adult life that the thing he wants is already his. According to Jason Zinnemann's 2017 biography, Letterman had simply assumed one day he would get the offer. It never came. NBC gave The Tonight Show to Jay Leno. Carson never spoke to Leno again. He never spoke to the NBC executives who made the decision again. His silence was the loudest endorsement Letterman never received. Letterman took the Let Show to CBS in August 1993. He competed against Leno for the next 12 years with the focused, unrelenting energy of a man who has something to prove and knows exactly who he is proving it to. The ratings went back and forth. The reviews remained good. The machine kept running. On January 14, 2000, he went in for what he expected to be a routine checkup. He had high cholesterol. He had a family history that he understood with the specific clarity of a child who watched his father survive one cardiac event and not survive the second. The angiogram showed a blocked artery. He was 52 years old, 4 years younger than his father had been when he died. That afternoon, Dr. Wayne Isom performed emergency quintuple bypass surgery at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan. It was the first time in 20 years of late night that David Letterman missed a show. He was out for 34 days. He came back on February 21, 2000, and made jokes about it because that is what David Letterman did with things that frightened him. He thanked his surgeon. He thanked his staff. He said, "After what I have been through, I am just happy to be wearing clothes that open in the front." The audience laughed, and the audience was right to laugh, and the joke was also completely true. What do you do when the tools that carried you your entire life are no longer enough? Think about that and tell us in the comments. Carson died in January 2005. He and Letterman had never spoken about the succession, not directly, not in any recorded conversation anyone has produced. What Carson did instead, in his years of retirement, was quietly feed Letterman jokes, material sent through friends, a private endorsement conducted entirely in the shadow of public silence. It was the closest thing to an apology either man was capable of offering or receiving. In March 2009, Letterman married Regina Lasco, his partner of 23 years. They had a son, Harry, who was 6. For approximately 6 months, David Letterman had what might be called a settled life. Then September arrived. What David Letterman's life reveals is not a lesson about fame or ambition. It reveals something quieter, that the tools we develop to survive our earliest pain, the deflection, the irony, the performance of competence, do not stay tools forever. They become the architecture. And when the architecture is under enough pressure, it does not bend, it exposes itself. The morning after he told his audience the truth, David Letterman went to the Ed Sullivan Theater. Not because the show was taping. He went because the studio was the one place where he had always known what he was supposed to do. He told his biographer, Jason Zinnemann, that he didn't want to go outside, that outside he was scared, that he needed a refuge, that without knowing it, his people were holding him up. Just a man in an empty theater, very early in the morning, sitting at the one desk where he had always known how to be himself. Discovering at 62 that he was still not entirely sure who that was. If this story moved you, hit the like button, not for the algorithm, but as a small acknowledgement of a life honestly examined. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. That is what this channel is built for. What city are you watching from tonight? Leave it in the comments. If you know someone who has built their whole life around a performance and quietly paid for it, share this with them today. And if you could say one thing directly to David Letterman right now, what would it be?